Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 13th of August and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 42, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. Once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
So, we've got a lot of headlines to try and get through today, particularly as the used vehicle transactional sales have come out this week for the second quarter. So, what are we actually covering in the headlines this week, Curtis?
Well, you know what, Phil? It's very thematic this week because we've got stories on the used car markets. We've got updates on the chip shortage. We'll be looking at some Chinese brands coming to Europe, and we'll finish off with a couple of acquisitions. So headlines this week are from AM, Car Dealer, Automotive News Europe as well, and Reuters. So SMMT reveals Q2 used transactions down 19%. Older cars create problems for 86% of dealers. Chip makers have a message for car makers. It's your turn to pay. 100,000 units pulled from US production last week because of chip shortages. BYD launches in Europe through the Whitton Mobility Group. Great Wall launches 2 EV brands in Europe through ML Frey. And finally, news on 2 dealer group acquisitions.
Well, we're a bit everywhere this week, aren't we, Curtis?
Yeah.
We've gone global this week with everything going on, but we'll stick a little bit more local to begin with, and that's the story, as you said there, with the lead story this week, which is in Car Dealer. And this is brakes slammed on booming used car market as second quarter saw hefty decline. Now, this is obviously on the back of the latest quarterly used car transactions from the SMMT, which they tend to come out approximately 6 weeks after the quarter has finished. So they have come out this week, but the quarter's finished on a total of 1.7 million transactions, so 1.759684, but that is an 18.8% fall year on year. So, they severely talking about that drop in used car transactions, but you and I were chatting, but we've got to put this in context of how strong the quarter was last year in what it's comparing to.
Yeah, exactly. We're still in that world where year-on-year comparisons aren't necessarily comparing apples with apples and pears with pears. So if we look at year-to-date registrations, used car transactions, they've reached 3.5 million, and that compares with 3.8 million this time last year. So that's down 8.3% year on year. And looking at the Q2 data in particular, so declines were actually recorded in each month, with falls in April, May, and June of 17%, 21%, and 18% respectively. So, as I say, that brings those first half transactions down by 8.3%.
And again, as you say there, it's very difficult doing year on year comparisons because we're at different sort of stages of lockdowns and recovery through 2021 and 2020, and we know that we were up 5.1% in the first quarter compared to last year, but down 8.8% on the quarter before in terms of that 2020. But we know we went into sort of lockdown mid-March in the UK in 2020. So, the first quarter of last year, although this year was up compared to then, it was still down compared to pre-pandemic levels. And similar for Q2, 1.7 result for Q2. If you look at 2019, we're just over 2 million. So, the 2.167 that we did in 2021 was a good increase on normal pre-pandemic levels, but it was 108% on the year before of 2020. So, we are sort of all over the place a little bit with this, but I think everybody did expect the Q2 results to be a bit of a challenge, because we know that consumer demand has now been dropping off through that sort of second part of the second quarter. But we know vehicle supply, as a consequence of the new vehicle market, continues to be constrained, which is obviously, with the conversations right across the sector, particularly with Darren from Cap HPI, is holding that used vehicle wholesale price up quite firmly at the minute because of shortage of stock.
Yeah, and there was good news for battery electric vehicles. They were the only sector to see growth. They increased 57% year on year to reach 1 in 105 transactions. But to put that in context, petrol and diesel vehicles remain dominant, totaling 1.6 million units, which is 95.6% of all transactions. So still a long way to go, but we are seeing those improvements quarter on quarter, and they are accelerating.
Yeah, I mean, I am personally quite pleased in a weird way. I'm not pleased that we've got a downturn in used car transactions, far from it, because that hits financially in the sector. But we, as in our annual forecast, as part of our used car forecast for the year at Cox Automotive in the Auto Focus, we are year to date within 0.1% of our baseline for the half year point. Although that Q2 result, we were about 0.5% out on the downside. So there is this concern and caution around the second quarter now as to what that will look like. As we've discussed a couple of times recently on the podcast, September is a key month now for the second half of the year. We do expect that recovery maybe in the fourth quarter slowly as supply starts to come back in, but September is going to be the key month that will probably be the decider in terms of where we head in this second half of the year. But we'll try and keep a close eye on that one, won't we, Curtis?
We will, yeah. And staying with used cars for the next story, which is from AM Online. The headline is "Older Cars Create Problems for 86% of Dealers." So this is based on some research done by Startline Motor Finance, and they're suggesting that older vehicles are creating problems with service history, preparation, and breakdowns, as 86% of dealers express issues. So quite an interesting piece of research here, because it does throw out some interesting stats. So another stat that caught my eye was that 58% of dealers are selling older cars than they were 3 years ago. I would have thought that'd be higher, but it's still well over half, and that is as a result of stock shortages and higher values. And as a result, 32% say that vehicle history has become more important. 24% say that more preparation is needed for sale. 13% that breakdowns or warranty claims are more common, and 11% that customers require more convincing to buy. And that's a particularly interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and there's a point in this about optimism towards stock supply is strengthening, which is quite interesting on the back of the previous story that 67% said that motor finance availability is improving. And those that were a little bit more pessimistic say that the market and prices are weakening. And that was 45%. And the same 45% said that stock supply is poorer. So I think it's there's a lot going on in the market at the minute as we sort of I wouldn't who'd be a forecaster at this time of the industry, Curtis?
Exactly. So heading over to the subject of chip shortages, which is covered this week by Reuters and Automotive News. So they're kind of two related but different stories. So starting with the Reuters one, the headline is "The chip makers have a message for car makers. It's your turn to pay." Now,
I mean, that's a headline and a half, isn't it? Yeah.
It's great, isn't it? I mean, this is a fascinating one. So it suggests the shortages of the semiconductors cars, are forcing global automakers to scrap production plans for millions of cars over the past 2 years, are actually easing at a new and permanent cost to the car companies. So we'll get back to that easing in a minute, because we have another story that does actually question that. But what's particularly interesting in this story is it identifies a changing trend within the OEMs, who previously, I think most of them would put their hands up to actually neglecting the area of chips,
Hmm.
because it's a commodity that they order for cars and don't really give much thought about it until the supply chain
Dries up.
goes wrong. Yeah, exactly. And then suddenly it becomes a big issue, which has really dominated the market for, well, at least the last 18 months. So this story reports on how GM, Volkswagen Group, and Ford have all created new teams, and they are created specifically to negotiate directly with chip makers. So it's starting some dialogue between chip makers, which never happened before. Nissan is also said to be accepting longer order commitments and taking on higher inventories than before, while Stellantis and GM will work closer with chip makers to design components. So it's quite an interesting one, this, because it goes through the sort of supply line, doesn't it, of chips.
Yes.
It does tick an awful lot of boxes that remained empty before.
I like the one of the opening paragraphs. Really, what has been war room operations to manage chip shortages are becoming embedded features of vehicle development, and that says that executives in both industries. So yeah, it's quite, we talk about war rooms, don't we? That they've got, but having a war room that's about that tier one, tier two, tier three supplier within that chip market is significant, as you said earlier, significant change for the sector. But yeah, it's you know. You look at some of the statements coming out of some of these, and we mentioned it recently in a conversation. But with what's going on between China and Taiwan at the minute, that there is manufacturers of chips sat in Taiwan,
Yes.
semiconductor manufacturers that could change depending on what direction that conflict or potential conflict might take. So there's a lot happening, isn't there?
Yeah, in fact, there's one of the Taiwanese chip producers quoted in this story and saying that previously he never heard from car manufacturers, and now his phone doesn't stop ringing. So it kind of gives an indication on how things are changing. And Phil, I love a stat. There's a good one in this. So the average semiconductor content per vehicle, according to this piece, will exceed $1,000 by 2026. So that's doubling from the first year of the pandemic. And that's according to Gartner, who are quoted in this piece. So one example, so the all-electric Porsche Taycan has over 8,000 chips,
Yeah.
and that cost will double or triple by the end of the decade, according to Volkswagen. So you can see why cars are becoming more expensive.
Exactly, and that's the whole point with this. That particularly your point there in terms of that electric vehicle and the volume of semiconductors, stroke chips that they require. The view was before all this started to happen that scale would start to drop the price of these electric vehicles and make them more accessible and more affordable to the general market. Whereas actually what is now starting to happen is it's actually very expensive to get the product to build these electric vehicles, particularly with the chip increase there. Forgetting other raw materials that have obviously all gone up by various different rates over the last 12, 18 months, that severely will hit either the OEM and consequently pass through down to the end user, the purchase of that vehicle in time. So there's a lot riding on this at the minute.
There is, and the story does sort of intimate that what OEMs are really looking at now is trying to look at ways of reducing the chip content, where they can centralize computer systems within cars. They'll be looking at new tech that doesn't require so many chips. So we'll see how that one pans out over the years.
Yeah, well, there's the closing paragraph is comments from AFS, auto forecast solutions that estimates that microchip shortages have forced automakers around the world to cut over 13 million vehicles from production plans since the start of 2021, and then quoted to say it's an arrogant industry and that sometimes it just bites them in the rear. So we'll finish that story there because it's a very unique ending to that story. But
yeah, and we'll stay with the chip shortages and the way that it is panning out, especially in America, because I don't know about you, Phil, but I had heard about an easing, production starting to improve slightly. But the latest numbers from North America show the complete opposite, because the story in Automotive News, the headline is latest numbers on the microchip shortage, North America hit hard. So this is over 100,000 vehicles were actually knocked out of production last week alone because of the chip shortage and the way that's impacting production. So it's not going away in a hurry, is it?
no, it's certainly not. And as we talk about production recovery, how large or small that is, you've also got this now war in terms of where those vehicles are heading. We talk about the UK in a post-Brexit environment. You talk about Europe and their expansion of that investment in electrification and growth. But actually, you've got US now coming very heavily into the market. You've got US trying to secure, obviously, microchip factories for the US. They're obviously, identifying a significant growth on the back of the latest from President Biden there, that, this investment and demand on products is going to be significant. So the recovery is slow, but actually the demand is significantly rising, and it's rising in markets that probably wouldn't have had such a demand previously. So yeah, it's going to get very, very messy, should we say, in the market. And you say there about the breakdown of that supply chain issues, and what's happening in terms of that availability of semiconductors. But overall, yes, the projection for 2022 year to date is they've done 3.8 million, and we're at 2.9 million year
Yes.
to date. But it's not long left, is there, for the remainder of the year, and it's not moving very quickly.
No, and there's a forecast from Auto Forecast Solutions, who were quoted in the previous story, that suggests that the chip shortage should actually improve because of the global economy. So, how's that for progress? Takes the slowdown of the global economy to improve the supply of semiconductors, because I guess there's less demand.
Yes, yeah, I'm going to say that's your thing. It's the consequence of the demand that is actually improving supply. Yeah, it's not really the acceleration that you do want there. But as clearly between them two stories from Reuters and Automotive News, there's a lot happening still in that supply material, that semiconductor and microchip sector, and some fantastic stats there with that cost and obviously the number of chips. Because we talk, historically, you would off the top of your head think 1,000 to maybe 3,000 microchips, but when you start talking 8,000 in a Porsche, it's a big demand into it on that supply market.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. Now it's time to catch up with our industry wellbeing guru, Stephen Whitton from Menable, reflecting on some of the issues he's been discussing with colleagues over the past week or so in the automotive sector, including inclusivity and why it's good to talk about mental health.
Yeah, hi Phil, hi Curtis. Good to be back with another Menable Moments. Hope you're both well. And a big hello and shout out to everyone listening, of course. And I just want to start with an excerpt from a message that I received from somebody on LinkedIn. Somebody that I've recently had a conversation with, and their comment to me was, it was so refreshing to have a conversation about a subject that I've tried to avoid for many years. And I thought, do you know what? that really sums up what we're all about. That, I've said this before, we are a male-dominated industry. We clearly have a lot of men working in our sector. We are a diagnostic and fix-it business. And as a result, we diagnose problems and we fix problems. And men, traditionally, are fairly well known for having a bit of an attitude that, well, if we can't fix it, why do we talk about it? So I think put those two things together, and that's where we have had a bit of a problem. So we do have a legacy of really avoiding talking about these kind of tough subjects. Now, I said last time, everyone's qualified to talk about mental health. Completely stand by that. You don't have to have certificates and be qualified to have empathy and understanding and talk to somebody. I probably would refrain from making any suggestions or solutions or fixing anything, but you certainly can lean shoulder to shoulder with your peers and your colleagues and support them and listen and understand. Now, that brings me on to another area that we haven't really touched on before, and that is, and somebody else I want to give a shout out to and an introduction to the podcast as well. A great guy called Edmund Rogers. He's the founder of Driving Pride. And as you might imagine, Driving Pride is an organisation that's getting a lot of traction because they are creating support networks for the LGBTQ plus community within the automotive industry. Now, many of you will know that I'm an ally, and Menable is an ally of the LGBT community. And we really want to get that being one of the sort of loose threads of the whole mental health and diversity and inclusion bits that we need to bring together. Now, being gay, bisexual or whatever is not in itself a mental health issue, but the stress and anxiety that go with it can be. And I'm particularly talking about the many men, again, in particular, that I know are not out or not comfortable being out, and also the need for us to attract, young talent into our industry as well. And are we attracting them from the LGBT community? Are our workplaces psychologically safe? Are they places that these guys and girls can come into without fear of repercussion or consequences or banter that takes them over the edge? Now, we all like a laugh and a joke, and I'm the first to be in the queue for all of that. But this particular area is close to my heart, as many of you will know, and really is quite important that we start to address that. So bringing all of that together, I'm delighted to really mention Driving Pride, and would ask any of you to sort of look them up and get involved. Find Edmund on LinkedIn. He's also a serving officer in the Territorial Army, so he deserves massive respect and a huge shout out for that alone. But the work that he and the team around him are doing around Driving Pride is absolutely brilliant. And that's just, again, another one of the facets that affects mental health across our sector. And if we've got any hope of addressing any of the diversity and inclusion pieces, then that's something that we need to be thinking about too. But I go back to the comment that somebody said of how great it was to have a conversation about a subject that we've avoided for a long time. And what I would say to you is, we need to stop avoiding those conversations. We need to accept that everyone has mental health, just as we all have physical health. And it's okay to talk, and it's okay to be shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues and to understand where people are at. So I'm going to share with you again the little tool that we use in that respect, which is the rev counter analogy. So just like a car's rev counter, if the engine's running properly, it's at about a 2 out of 10. Increase the pressure and those revs go up. And I know from my own experience that those revs have gone right up towards the red zone at one point. And what I needed was someone to talk to, someone to turn to, someone that would understand, empathise, not judge, not fix, and also to feel psychologically safe that it was okay to have that conversation. Now, I'm in that place now, but it's taken a very long time. And our work is about encouraging that across our industry. So think about the people around you, think about your business. Is it psychologically safe? Do you have the right levels of empathy and competence and care and understanding across your teams? And if not, what do you need to do to get that in place? Because there are going to be people that want to come and work for you or already work for you that perhaps are in the LGBT community or are secretly in that community and don't feel safe to be able to talk openly about it. So something else to have a think about. And thanks again for having us back for a Menable Moments. Hope you enjoyed the heat wave this week and keep safe. And we will look forward to being back with you soon. Take care.
Well, as always, gives you something to think about from that 6 minutes of wisdom coming from Stephen there. So, yeah, I mean, it's always that, think about others and be conscious of others, isn't it? I think more than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. And we do joke that Stephen is easy to find on social media, but he is. You can also email him at Stephen with a PH .whitton@menable.org, or you can head over to the Menable website, which is menable.org. So if you do want to get in touch with Stephen, find out a bit more about how Menable can help you or your business, then do have a chat with him, because as he said in his piece, it's good to talk.
Yeah, definitely. I know he's busy, daily at the minute with lots of things going on. So, but do reach out to him. He's always there and available to talk, as he has said there. So, and we've got a new listener to the podcast. So,
Yes.
thank you for that and welcome. So, moving on a little bit, and the next couple of stories is very much Chinese focused. It's the Chinese brands. So, we are going over to Automotive News Europe, which the headline is BYD signs Headin Mobility Group to distribute EVs in Sweden and Germany. So I think on the back of a story that we talked about quite a while ago, Curtis, about these Chinese brands and the knowledge of them and if people can name them or not. And BYD was I think that was eluded from that list. I wasn't sure.
It was missing from the list that I think it was what car did some research on how familiar these names were, and that wasn't on it.
Yeah, and BYD is probably one of the bigger Chinese brands, and they've got involved in a lot of things as we discussed. But this is about them linking deal with Europe's Headin Group to distribute their EVs in Sweden and Germany. This is quite a strategic, clever move, I think, by BYD, because this gives them a distribution network. It gives them a very dominant, well-liked group under Headin, direct into Sweden there, but obviously, a significant move straight into the German market, and very much dominating that European opportunity for BYD. So it's quite a shrewd move, this one.
It is, yes, and the rollout is going to be pretty quick, because they will open dealerships, BYD dealerships, in Sweden in October, followed by Germany shortly afterwards, also in October, with deliveries expected to start in Q4, later in Q4. And BYD, I mean, they are an interesting brand, as you say. They are now actually purely EV, because they stopped ICE production as recently as March, so they're totally focused on EVs. And of course, the question some listeners will be posing is, well, if they're being introduced into Europe, will they come to the UK? So that's an unanswered question at the moment, but I would draw lines between Headin and their interest in Pendragon, because they are a majority shareholder of Pendragon. Now, I'm probably putting two and two together and getting six, but stranger things have happened, and if Headin was looking to introduce distribution in the UK, well, there is a potential platform there. Yeah, we will see.
Yeah, and I mean we've got to be very careful on what we do assume there, I suppose, in many ways. But I think if you look at what is happening in the marketplace and the world of agency and distribution, looking from the manufacturers and looking for these partners who could distribute their product very easily into a ready-made network, then we've always sort of said that what's happening in terms of production shortage that we're talking about in the first half of the show, but actually, will those shortages be made up by the likes of BYD and others in the UK? We've seen what growth MG have enjoyed in the UK market. BYD, you start to look at some of their volume growth, and they're saying, you said there about them obviously stopping the combustion engine gas, or they call it gasoline powered light vehicles in March, but it sold 641,000 EVs in the first half of the year and plug-in hybrids globally. So it's not a small operator already in that EV and hybrid space. So we can see where this is heading, can't we?
Yeah, and even within Headin Motor Mobility Group, they're a big operator. They've got 230 sites across Northern and Western Europe. So if BYD do actually want to accelerate that rollout, then they've got a lot of footfall, a lot of potential footfall there because they've got the geography covered.
Yeah, exactly. So we're heading over to the next story in Automotive News Europe, which is this is a connected theme, and this is talking about Great Wall, and these have partnered with ML Freight to distribute Way and Aura brands through their market, and we talk about market size, and we every time we talk about return on investment and financial profitability when we start to talk about that European market, and we always talk about ML3 because you really don't see how big these guys are in the market. We look at some of those UK operators, but ML3 are a seriously sized business in that global marketplace, and this is again a fantastic move, not just for ML3 but basically for that Great Wall as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Emil Frey, they are actually Europe's biggest dealer group, and every year, I think it's towards the beginning of the year, we always look at the ICDP top 50 dealers in Europe, and they've by far and away the largest dealer group across the continent. And this is an interesting story because Great Wall have looked at Europe before. I mean, many years ago, you probably recall, Phil, that International Motors
Yes.
actually acted as the distributor for Great Wall's pickups, but it didn't last long. They made quite a bit of noise when they entered and then quietly withdrew. So, this is pretty much the second phase, but I think the product is now ready for the European market. So, as you say, there's two brands, two electric brands. There's Aura, which is
Funky
sort of,
cat.
yeah, the Aura Funky Cat, which takes my award for most outrageous car name of the year so far. So that's a compact vehicle, and that's scheduled to go on sale in Germany again in Q4. But they're also bringing in their premium brand, which is Way, and that will also debut in Germany with the Coffee 01, which is probably number 2 in my rankings, and that'll be a plug-in hybrid SUV. So interesting that they are bringing in plug-in hybrids
Yes.
as well as pure EVs.
Yeah, but you say that I'm not sure you that same power in that same sentence there. Premium brand, Coffee 01.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be done with this, isn't there? But again, this is just in those two stories, and when we conversations I've had across the network about the Chinese brands, and you and I have had, Curtis, that they're coming, they are on the way, and they're coming fast. And these two stories sort of significantly highlight that in terms of the relationship that they've got, how they're partnering up with some of these significant operators, be it Heading Group or be it ML Frey. These kind of partnerships will give them that route and footprint into the marketplace in volume as well. So, if anyone thought that the Chinese brands weren't coming, they clearly are. And yeah.
And you know what, Phil? There's a tease at the end of this story which says both companies, so that's Menable and BYD, are currently in intensive talks to extend the strategic cooperation for both brands to other important markets in Europe. So you heard it here first.
Yeah, definitely. So back home a little bit, and this
Yeah.
is back to some UK dealer groups, and I say UK because the first one is AM Online, and this is Sinclair Group moves into England with Schucker's Land Rover and Hyundai acquisition. So I think, is this their first move into England out of Wales? Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so it's multi-franchise, Swansea-based Sinclair Group is making its first move into England by adding 2 Land Rover dealerships and its first Hyundai franchise through the acquisition of Schucker's. So the deal sees the group broaden its Welsh territory with Land Rover and Hyundai dealerships in Aberystwyth, whilst also crossing into England with a Land Rover franchise in Ludlow. Ludlow's a town I actually know very well.
Yes.
I used to live there for a while. Lovely, lovely place on the Welsh borders. So yeah, I mean, it's a great deal. This one, isn't it? Schucker's, they're a £50 million turnover group. Well established. Staff will transfer as part of the acquisition, and this will bring Sinclair's workforce up to 900 employees, representing 10 brands in 24 locations. So, yeah, a good purchase and a good fit there.
Yeah, and Dave Kendrick, who is head of automotive at UHY Hacker Young and a follower of the podcast, who advised the shareholders of Schucker's on the sale, said that it's been a very interesting few years for Schucker's, having sold Shrewsbury Land Rover initially and then purchasing the Aberystwyth Land Rover and Hyundai business a short while after. So saying that this sale is to Sinclair, which makes an absolute sense in it as it links nicely with their existing Ross-on-Wye dealership there, creating a strong market area. And there's no doubt that the business will continue to grow and flourish under the new ownership there. So clearly, David believes this is a fantastic acquisition there, and we'll probably see more from these guys in the future.
And we have another acquisition, this time reported by Car Dealer, and the headline is Snows snaps up long-serving Vauxhall dealer Picador. So this is heading to the south coast of England. So Snows has snapped up rival Southampton-based group Picador. The deal for an undisclosed sum sees the Vauxhall name being added to the roster of marques that Snows represents, which includes BMW, Volvo, Mazda, Kia, Toyota, and several Stellantis brands. So there's already a good fit there with Stellantis. And it's worth pointing out that Picador, they're actually one of the longest established Vauxhall dealers. So they've represented the brand since 1962, so celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. And we'll see the ownership and the name go over to Snows.
Yeah, and I think you start to see a little bit more of this, what you under that Stellantis umbrella. We've talked recently about sort of this dual franchising under Stellantis, and we talked recently on the podcast about that first Stellantis site being opened in the UK. And you start to see a little bit more of this now, and I envisage that a lot more is going on behind the scenes with this kind of entrance and exit from some of these Stellantis brands and bringing them under a single ownership of those FCA and Stellantis operations. So interesting though, but as you say, it's sad to see a long established 60-year-old operation going. With obviously their staff and loyal customers, but it goes to a good business, and I think the report is that all the staff are going along with them, isn't it? I think as well. So again, great opportunity there going forward.
Yeah, and it's effectively 2 sites, so it's Shoaling in Southampton and Chandler's Ford near Eastleigh, so that they will join the Snows Motor Group now.
So that's kind of it for this week. So as I said, a bit of a global view of what's happening in the market. The chip shortage gets interesting, and some, as I said there, with some very interesting statements there from some of those commentating on the stories, both in automotive news and Reuters there around that chip shortage continuing and what's starting to play out there. Secondly, Chinese are coming and they're coming fast. So, but as always, please head over to some of the sources that we've shouted out there. A lot more on those stories themselves, and a lot more coming out on a regular basis. But busy global update there from us, Curtis.
Well, Phil, that's all for now. So you've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chat that matters. We're back again next week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.